Hello, Paul Thanos. Welcome to our podcast. Thanks for joining us. We were really interested to hear more about the Department of Commerce, what you do, how you got into this field. I think the US government is so big and so enormous. There's so many resources available. Most people don't know where to go, how to start. So we're hoping you can simplify, demystify government so American companies can take advantage of all that the Department of Commerce has to offer. With that, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into this field? How long you've been with commerce? And how has your career evolved over the years?
Thank you, Shara. First, it's a pleasure to be a part of this podcast. So thanks for the invitation. So I got into government in the early 90s, coming out of graduate school. At that time, my first job in government, at the Commerce was at the Commerce Department actually. And it was focused at that time, it was on Middle East policy.
Right.
So I came out of grad school at that time. It was in the Clinton era when the Middle East peace process was a really big priority of the administration at that time. And we did a lot of work on the economic and commercial aspect to facilitate Middle East peace. And I did that about 10 years, a little more than 10 years. And, then I got the opportunity to go to Capitol Hill and do a fellowship for Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington State, working on foreign policy, trade, and defense. That was very eye-opening. It was right after, a year and a half after 9/11. So there was certainly a lot of focus at that time on security. And, I had been working on trade and economic issues for the prior 10 years. So it was very eye-opening in a lot of ways. I returned to the Commerce Department, to the International Trade Administration in the late aughts. And I should probably say that ITA, or the International Trade Administration, is about a 2,500 person global network.
Right.
The focus of the International Trade Administration is on supporting the competitiveness of US business. That network includes 100 offices scattered across the US, a big presence at headquarters in Washington, D.C., although what is headquarters now in the remote world? That's maybe a topic for a future public service session.
Right.
And also, maybe most importantly, commercial officers positioned across the globe in different parts of the world. So it's really, and with the focus on competitiveness, what do we do? Maybe your question would be. So it's a combination of policy work, trade promotion work, and also analysis work, where we publish articles, reports, documents, and we also advocate on behalf of U.S. business competing for projects around the world. That's a big part of what we do. And, I think our mission has obviously, in 25 years, there's been some changes here and there, but the main focus has held supporting the competitiveness of U.S. business in a myriad of ways. The other thing I'll mention too, commerce, and particularly the International Trade Administration, plays a big role as a convener across interagency. We don't always necessarily lead on an issue technically, but we are well positioned to bring together different agencies to first discuss and then maybe implement policies on whatever the issue might be.
Right. So you mentioned that convener role, and I think that's what's most daunting about when people look at the U.S. government. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the bureaucracy of it all. So is there any recent case studies you can point to where you played that convener role to help American companies be more competitive? I mean, how do people really plug in to this agency?
Well, there's a couple ways to do that. So for a small business, and that's a big priority now
Right.
of my agency, of I would say probably the entire government,
Sure.
is helping small businesses that have really been hammered as a
Yeah.
result of the pandemic and are trying to ramp back up. So we have a sweet spot. I'll give you an example. One, so we manage, my team specifically manages the Trade Finance Advisory Council. And that is an advisory council of private sector, primarily, also non-governmental organizations, other groups who make recommendations to the Commerce Secretary as to how the Commerce Department and what sort of policies, not only commerce, but the whole government can undertake to help expand access to finance and access to trade finance for small business. Now, how does that become relevant to the issue of convener? Well, we have other agencies that are ex officio members of the Trade Finance Advisory Council. That includes the Export-Import Bank. That includes the Small Business Administration. So we also have engagement. They're not ex officio members, but we certainly keep in touch on this with the Treasury Department. So this is one example where we bring people together, business, government, and hopefully to help solve problems for business, and particularly now small business.
Right. So you mentioned that's a key issue: COVID recovery, small business, and you mentioned trade finance. Now, a lot of Americans have been impacted by the high cost of commodities, lumber, other supplies. Uh, how is your office involved with suddenly the heightened cost of supplies? I mean, everything costs more now. Is there any role that the government plays in trying to bring those costs under control?
Well, we have a big sort of focus now. But it's not only the Commerce Department. It's
Sure.
actually a whole of government approach
Sure.
on supply chain.
Right.
And there's an executive order out now on supply chain, and where different agencies are consulting with industry and others to come up with solutions and policies to help address some of these issues that have popped up, where in some cases maybe there's shortages. In some cases, the costs of products have really gone through the roof.
Right.
I'm not directly engaged in that issue, but I can tell you that the Commerce Department, international trade is engaged. Supply chain issues have become more than a commercial issue. It's now also a national security issue.
Right. Right.
So that's why there's a much sort of bigger federal approach on that topic that's ongoing right now. And I expect you're going to hear much more about that issue in the very near future.
Right. And actually, that brings me, it's a good point about the whole of government and the executive order. Are there any pending legislation or recent changes that have happened that impact your office or Americans being engaged in the commerce that people should know about? Is there new legislation? Is there pending legislation that will change the opportunities that you have to share with people?
Well, there's a couple sort of big issues out there that I think that would have an impact on our work, and regulations or potentially legislation. One of them, so my team analyzes and looks very closely at the issues around blockchain technology.
Oh, okay.
And that relates to how companies are using blockchain technology to streamline their operations. There's a lot of governance issues around that, a lot of important use cases out there. There's also, of course, the biggest use case, which is around digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. Now, we don't promote the use of crypto or digital currencies, But depending on what happens with legislation in the future, also regulations, we are trying to understand better what are the implications of crypto, and maybe a little farther down the road, also central bank digital currencies,
Wow.
which doesn't have to be, necessarily related to blockchain technology. But the question is, if like, what's the impact for small business if these mechanisms become used more and more broadly in commercial transactions and cross-border transactions?
Right.
There's a lot of tricky issues around there, around AML, anti-money laundering
Sure.
requirements, know your customer, KYC. So we're not in that space, but we are trying to understand, what does it mean for a small business to be able to compete globally if the business can start utilizing some of these new technologies, such as crypto, uh, more easily? What will that mean? And how does the US maintain leadership in those areas?
Right. Well, that's new, right? I mean, I don't think a few years ago people were really thinking this could become a real conversation. I think there was a lot of hyperbole around, cryptocurrency. But here we are in 2021 talking about how to prepare and best put American companies in the best competitive position with if cryptocurrencies become a tool for finance, for international finance, for import
Yeah,
export.
we're trying to understand that now for
Right.
sure. We're not moving on any policies or
Sure. Sure.
programs,
Sure.
but we are trying to understand, and also the impact of blockchain technology on international trade and the movement of goods.
Yeah.
If you can, there's like, for example, trade finance. When you think of the most paper-based forms of financial services, trade finance is right up there.
Right.
Dealing with fax machines. I mean, it's somewhat shocking when you think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
But you know, decentralized technologies, distributed ledger technology, or blockchain, uh, can help empower and streamline some of these tedious processes that are currently part of just simply getting paid if you're exporting your products.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so this is an area we've spent a lot of time on um, in the previous administration. We're continuing it in this administration, and it's also, to be perfectly honest, Shariar, as a manager, and I don't have a huge team, but we've got 12 people total.
Sure.
And I really appreciate having the opportunity to being involved in issues like this,
Right.
because it helps to motivate staff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these aren't mundane sort of issues. They're
Right.
top of mind, front and center. And to
Right.
have an opportunity to engage even in a small way can help motivate employees.
Right. Right. No, you're right. I mean, it's cutting edge technology. It's top of mind for really world financiers at every level. There are security issues. There are, as you mentioned, money laundering issues. There's obviously U.S. sanctions and all that framework. And I mean, there's a lot to consider. But your job wasn't complex enough. Now it's just got another layer of complexity, which keeps things interesting from a public service standpoint. I think most public servants would appreciate being on the cutting edge of a conversation and hoping to improve American competitiveness. That's really the goal,
Yeah.
the end game. So this is domestic stuff. We're talking about international finance. Uh, how do you help American companies be more competitive or win bids abroad? A lot of American companies are involved in foreign projects. How do you work around the world?
Great question. So I mentioned the global network of ITA. The most effective way we help businesses is leveraging that network. So, to explain that, we negotiate trade agreements. We participate in negotiations for bilateral and multilateral trade agreements to open new markets for U.S. firms. We advocate on behalf of U.S. companies who are trying to win projects all over the world. We certainly engage in international standards organizations to make sure that as product standards are being formulated and developed around the world, that U.S. U.S. companies aren't discriminated against. We write. When international foreign leaders come in and meet with our senior leadership, we tee up issues for our leaders to raise with our counterparts to emphasize sort of where our priorities are and also how we can work together. We also develop initiatives where we can collaborate with our partners and all over the world. And like one example that we have developed just in the last few months within my own team is an environmental social governance investment initiatives, where we're talking to different governments about how they're approaching and incentivizing ESG investing. This is a very big topic now. More and more of the financial services industry is embracing ESG lens for investing. You have retail investors who are demanding it increasingly. And what we're trying to do is create mechanisms, and we've got a few of these dialogues already, and we will have a few more, to not only discuss ESG with our counterparts, but also to create a mechanism to highlight American leadership in ESG investing and to create an American sort of a momentum, so there's more discussion and awareness of how American insurance companies, mutual funds, banks, and other pension funds. I mean, this is a big issue in California with the pension fund where, the CalPERS, CalSTRS, they've embraced ESG frameworks, actually going back several years now. But this has been one of our new initiatives that we hope not only to discuss policy issues around ESG and how different governments are approaching the topic, but also to create a vehicle to highlight American leadership on these topics. Right. And that's another one that I would say, when you talk about what people can get excited about in terms of public service,
right?
It's engagement in these type topics.
Right. Thank God, I think people don't have to navigate federal government alone. The U.S. Department of Commerce has resources in most major metropolitan cities in the country. So if you're a small business, a company that needs some help, you can make a beeline to your local office and kind of talk with someone locally. And they will help you to connect, obviously, with your office or any other agency they need to help that small business, and especially to be considerate of not only legislation, but regulation, as you made the distinction, so they can navigate and be successful and be competitive. Any final thoughts? Any best advice you can give small companies to take advantage of your services right now?
Well, I think the main thing for small business is, one, to be aware that the International Trade Administration and the Commerce Department exists.
Right.
As you pointed out, the best way to do that is to connect, through your local office. So if you're, for example, a business in just say Chula Vista, we have a big group in San Diego that is very capable and will be very responsive in terms of getting back to you and helping you really strategize how to solve a problem. And all of that information in terms of points of contact can be found pretty easily at trade.gov, at the website that lists all the offices and contacts.
Right.
the other thing, Shahryar, I would say in terms of public service, more generally, is that, sometimes the government bureaucrats, get a bad rap, and we're, a lot of times under under critique here and there. And the only thing I would say, to step back a little bit, is the federal mission, particularly in the last year, has really expanded. It had been expanding prior to the last year. It continues to expand. Um, they're high quality people, like my experience and with dealing with civil servants and public service. Most of them are very dedicated people trying to serve the public. And the topics and the issues that we often confront can be complicated. They take, because government, the nature of government, they take patience sometimes to solve. But I do encourage people in small business to reach out, particularly if you're thinking of going global. And sometimes that can be daunting for a small business, but please think of us, trade.gov, and please reach out whenever you feel you need to.
Right. Thank you so much, Paul Thanos, Director of Office of Finance and Insurance Industries, U.S. Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll come back soon.
Thanks, Shahryar. I look forward to that.